Hello, and welcome to the Canadian political scene. Today, we will look at the controversy surrounding the Robocall scandal.
And what we have said very clearly is we have absolutely no involvement. We ran a clean and ethical campaign, and we can demonstrate that.
There will be a new code on Parliament Hill. Bend the rules, you will be punished. Break the law, you will be charged. Abuse the public trust, you will go to prison. If you behave unethically or dishonestly, then do not expect a reward from this Prime Minister of Canada.
That was Prime Minister Stephen Harper in 2006 when he promised to make Ottawa accountable and to change the way business is done. The 2011 election campaign didn't only give the Conservatives their coveted majority government, it brought our electoral process to question. Last year, reports were made daily as alleged robocalls meant to deter non-conservative voters spread from Guelph to over 50 of Canada's ridings. One can only imagine how Canada's electoral integrity took a hit with this headline.
Two developments tonight on the major political story of the last month. One, we're finally hearing from the head of Elections Canada about those fraudulent phone calls in the last election. He says more than 700 Canadians report specific allegations of wrongdoing.
The Conservatives sent Dean Del Mastro to defend them. Here's what he had to say.
The unsubstantiated slur campaign that's been launched by the Liberals and then by the NDP are that the Conservative Party is behind this. And what we have said very clearly is we have absolutely no involvement. We ran a clean and ethical campaign, and we can demonstrate that.
His talking points then evolved to blaming the Liberals.
You know, Mr. Speaker, it is reprehensible to make baseless smears in this House, unsubstantiated smears. That's what the leader of the Liberal Party has in fact undertaken for more than the past week. The leader of the Liberal Party knows full well every household that they called, every originating phone number that they called them from, and in fact, Mr. Speaker, when those calls were made. When is he going to make those phone records public? Because I believe when those phone records are made public, the Liberal Party will in fact have fingered itself for each and every one of these calls that they allege to have taken place.
No, because obviously our party is not behind these calls. We know that. We believe the Liberal Party is we believe the Liberal Party has in fact made these allegations, and they've made these allegations knowing full well that they paid these companies millions of dollars to make calls to hundreds of thousands of households across the country. It's an unsubstantiated smear campaign.
Mr. Del Mastro, if the Liberal Party did that, isn't that just
No, I don't, sir. No, I don't.
What are you afraid of?
Then the spotlight turned on Dean Del Mastro. The defender of the Conservative Party in the Robocall scandal came under fire when it turned out that he himself was responsible for election irregularities.
CBC has just obtained new documents from Elections Canada's investigation into Ontario Conservative MP, Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Dean Del Mastro. This is in regards to his election spending in the 2008 campaign. The Prime Minister stood up to defend Dean Del Mastro just today. Terry Molesky is here to update us on these new documents. Terry, we've been following this story for a while. What new documents do you have, and what do they show?
Well, basically, this is a sworn affidavit sworn out by an Elections Canada investigator named Thomas Ritchie. It's not criminal charges. It's important to emphasize. Nobody's laying any charges. However, it is a sworn affidavit which basically takes direct aim at Dean Del Mastro and accuses him of personal complicity in a scheme to overspend and to cover up that overspending on his 2008, not 2011, his 2008 election campaign. Basically what this is called an information to obtain. It lays out why the investigator believes this happened, and it all boils down to spending, ironically enough, on robocalls, that is to say voter ID calls, phone calls in great numbers, get out the vote calls made by a company called Hollinshed, run by a gentleman by the name of Frank Hall, who basically told Elections Canada that the returns filed, the campaign expense returns filed by the Del Mastro campaign were fraudulent. And having investigated, this investigator, Mr. Ritchie, says he believes it. I'll take you down to the key paragraph in this information to obtain. He says, and I quote, this is Mr. Ritchie, "This contract with a value of $21,000 should correctly have been reported in the Dean Del Mastro return as an election expense. However, the return only reported an election expense of $1,575 as being paid to Hollinshed. The amount of $1,575 was supported by an invoice supplied by Hollinshed at Dean Del Mastro's request." Then he goes on, and this is where it gets pretty painful. Frank Hall, president of Hollinshed, stated to me that Hollinshed never provided any services in respect to this invoice, and Hollinshed was never paid. Finally, he says the $21,000 contract with Hollinshed was paid by Dean Del Mastro from his personal bank account in a manner that facilitated the concealing and misreporting of elections expenses and contributions. That was filed at the end of November of last year.
So what did happen in May 2011? Well, we don't know. We're actually waiting for a public inquiry. But we know for sure that voters were misdirected, and the trend, as CBC investigates, is very disturbing.
They did call me back from the Conservative Association and asked if they could count on my support.
Tim McCoy of Ottawa-Vanier did not pledge his vote to the Tories. Then he got a misdirection call like this.
This is an automated message from Elections Canada.
I thought, well, that's strange. If Elections Canada doesn't call people who called me saying that Elections Canada had an important message for me.
It happened all over the country, and a pattern emerges in at least 31 ridings surveyed by CBC News. From coast to coast, misdirection calls were targeted at people who were not Tory supporters.
Due to a projected increase in voter turnout, your poll location has been changed.
Charles Cochrane in St. John told the Conservatives he would not vote for them. Then
the phone rang and I picked it up and it was a recorded message. This is Elections Canada calling. Your polling station is now changed.
Still, somehow, someone knew it made sense to misdirect Laurie Bruce in Fredericton. She says the Tories didn't even pretend that it wasn't them.
You know, this is so-and-so calling on behalf of Stephen Harper and Keith Ashfield for the Conservative Party.
Then came the misdirection.
And he told me that my voting location had changed. I, at that point, said no, it's at the same location that it always is.
But was it really the Conservatives? Laurie Bruce Googled the number and found out it was, but she wanted to be sure.
I called the number back and just received, I just got like an answering machine message saying, "Thank you for calling the Conservative Party."
In most cases, it was not so blatant. Most say they got separate calls.
The first one was a few weeks before the election, and it was simply asked me one question, and that was I going to vote for the Conservative Party? And I indicated no.
Only later did she get the second call.
That it was Elections Canada calling, and that they, due to higher than anticipated voter turnout, the polling station had been changed.
That was false, but it happened again and again.
We're just phoning to let you know that the polling stations have changed. And I said, no, they haven't. It's crap, and I hung up on her.
Astrid Diamond told Conservative callers repeatedly they did not have her vote. Then she, too, was misdirected.
The last phone call came from the same number that all the other calls had come from, which I'd found out was the Conservative Party.
On May 23rd of this year, Judge Richard Mosley ruled voter suppression and election fraud did happen. However, 6 ridings being contested by citizens groups were kept as they are because the judge claimed there wasn't enough evidence backing their claim that the Conservatives were responsible. But given there hasn't been a full inquiry, many questions remain unanswered, and Harper and the Conservatives' silent and dismissive approach to something as big as voter fraud raises questions in and of itself. On February 24th of 2012, Conservatives fired their Guelph staffer, Michael Stona, just a day after the affair entered national headlines. On April 3rd of this year, Elections Canada charged him in their investigation. When Harper was confronted about the affair last year, here's what he had to say.
The Conservative Party can say absolutely definitively it has no role in any of this.
And who can forget Dean Del Mastro's relentless defense of the Conservative Party? After CBC reported of his own wrongdoing, he has since dropped from the spotlight, and we haven't heard anything since.
Unsubstantiated smear campaign, baseless smears.
The next election is expected to be held in 2015, and you will choose the next government. Whether it remains a Harper government, or whether it becomes a Liberal government or an NDP government, that choice is in your hands. But the question now remains in your hands. What do you think of Stephen Harper's integrity? In light of the Robocall scandal, a year later and there still isn't a public inquiry, what do you think of the way that the scandal has been handled? What do you think of the way that our public institutions are treating something as serious as allegations that someone in this country was not able to uphold their right to vote? What do you think? Now, if you like this video and you want to see more videos, hit the subscribe button. It takes just a few seconds. Not all of the content, however, will be on the YouTube channel, so do feel free to go to our social media, Facebook, Twitter, Google+, like us, follow us, stay tuned. Bookmark the article that's in the description. It will be updated as soon as details come about. So now the question remains in your hands. What do you think of Stephen Harper's view of integrity in light of the Robocall scandal that is still ongoing and still filled with questions, even though it only was released to the headlines over a year ago, and even though it allegedly took place 2 years ago from last month?
How far would you extend that? Just watch me.